A couple of disgruntled Pokémon players, after having some issues with other competitors at previous tournaments, decided to shoot up the national tournament one summer. Or did they? Let's look deeper into this. For those of you who may not be in the know, the Pokémon World Championships is the highest level of competitive play in Pokémon. Usually it's held once a year every summer around August. The top players from all around the world come to compete and try to win a selection of prizes and honor, of course. It's an invitation-only event, as to get to that point you have to win in various more local tournaments throughout the year. Not only do you get the title of champion, but there are about $500,000 worth of prizes given out as well. A lot of these are given out in the form of scholarships, but still. The two men in today's case were really about to dampen that fun, as it seems. At the August 2015 event, security really had to be beefed up after a series of vague threats were posted to social media, mainly Facebook, by today's two Pokémon veterans. The men we're talking about today are named James Stumbo, who was 27, and Kevin Norton, who was 18 at the time. Both were from the state of Iowa and had no criminal background. Needless to say, both were pretty big into playing Pokémon too. James Stumbo had placed highly in Pokémon tournaments before and had been interviewed several times, even by Kotaku. He had even won the Nebraska State Tournament that very year. One of the men who interviewed him said that he seemed to be a pretty reserved guy, adding that every time I did an interview with him, he always seemed like a chill person, but he is also the type to be sarcastic and make jokes. All in all, people seemed to like him. Kevin Norton had competed in the Missouri tournament that year. Hey, I get to mention Missouri after all. When talking about Kevin, though, people were a little less optimistic. A friend from high school said he did have something wrong with him and needed help, and it's obvious he never got that. This particular friend had met him during their freshman year of high school. However, by the time senior year came around, Norton had stopped going to school entirely. This friend said that was likely due to pretty constant bullying. However, eventually the two met, became friends, and played a lot of Pokémon together, mainly at a local shop named Mayhem Comics. While people were gearing up for the national level tournament, Kevin and James were posting on social media about getting ready to go themselves. While what they were posting contained an element of excitement, it also contained what many took as serious threats. These threats were specific enough to get quite a bit of people pretty rattled. Police have since said that the posts were definitely alarming, but not really specific enough to constitute an actual threat. So, enough of my babbling, let's look at what they actually said. It seems that the post that originally brought attention to the two was one in which James posted, "Kevin Norton and I are ready for Worlds. Boston, here we come," paired with a picture of guns resting on the back of his car. In addition, a friend went on to reply with, "Good luck," only for Kevin to respond with killing the competition, while posing with a gun in his own profile picture. In another post that was somehow even more on the nose, James wrote, "My AR-15 says that you lose," in reference to other players. Other posts in their Facebook group, called Mayhem Pokémon Crew, contained references to Columbine, the Boston bombings, and to the Boston Massacre, although not all of those posts were made by Kevin or James. Either way, the moderator of the group ended up getting pretty spooked and sent a few messages to the Pokémon Company International about the whole thing. This set the events in motion that would lead to the event going under high alert and eventually to the two suspects being apprehended and prohibited from entering the event. The authorities at the John B. Hines Veterans Memorial Convention Center got in contact with the Boston Police Department to see what to do about these possible threats. To the dismay of the roughly 3,000 people attending the event, this screening was much more difficult and their bags were being checked much more thoroughly than usual. There were also dogs patrolling the area. They weren't told that there was such a threat towards the event, though, which left a bad taste in some of their mouths when they went on to hear about all of this later. Many of them have said that they would have preferred to know beforehand for obvious reasons. According to the police, the two men had actually made more specific threats towards certain members who would be attending the event. It seems that Kevin in particular had planned to shoot a moderator from the Facebook group who had banned him previously. What he actually said in those threats was unclear and hasn't been made known, so it's a little harder to judge on those. Kevin and James drove 25 hours to Boston in hopes of getting in, at least, and maybe in hopes of doing a lot more. Once the two showed up to the event, the police were waiting there to meet them. The cops prevented the two of them from even entering. They asked the two if they were able to produce some kind of gun license or permit, to which they weren't. The police then went to get a search warrant for their vehicle and released the two for the time being, without their car, that is. After this, the attendees of the tournament were finally told that there had been some threats made. It was a little too late, though, as nobody was made aware until after the suspects had actually been stopped. The police got that warrant and ended up searching the vehicle, which was parked outside the convention center. Inside, they found a 12-gauge Remington shotgun, a DPM-5 Model AR-15 rifle, a hunting knife, and several hundred rounds of ammunition. This then prompted them to issue an arrest warrant for both James Stumbo and Kevin Norton, and they were soon taken into custody after an arrest at their hotel in Saugus, Massachusetts. Both of the men, despite having no criminal record in the past, were now facing numerous gun charges. Both were charged with unlawful possession of ammunition, unlawful possession of a firearm, and various other firearm-related charges. Needless to say, given the scope of what they could have done, they were both held without bail. People who knew them were shocked to hear the news, needless to say. Namely, other people who attended their card games at a local card shop called Mayhem Comics back home. Both of the men's lawyers have said that their remarks online were just chatter, just tasteless jokes. Given that they never made any very specific threats, this could have been the case. Granted, knowing the current climate, they should have at least known that making jokes like these, especially with pictures of their guns, was incredibly stupid at the very least. Others noted that it was odd for them to actually qualify for the tournament and then threaten it, given that the event was open up to the public to spectate. They didn't need to bother getting an invitation to compete if they could have just ended normally to do what they were going to do. It would have been one thing if this was limited only to a series of vague Facebook threats, but the two men actually showing up to the tournament, packing heat in the trunk of the car, was ultimately what sealed their fate. Kevin's lawyer said that the whole thing was merely an error in judgment, and that the two had simply failed to research the gun laws in Massachusetts, which were quite a bit stricter than what they were used to back home in Iowa. They basically always drive around with loaded guns in the trunk in Iowa, he said. For those of you who may be in Iowa, let me know if that's true. I think that may be just a bit of an exaggeration. I mean, I grew up in Missouri, and yeah, some people would carry a loaded handgun under the seat for protection sometimes, or something like that, but even that I felt was kind of rare. Anyway, moving on. He said that the photos of the guns were merely a proclamation that the two were going to be successful at the tournament, and not that they were actually going to use those guns. Which seems like a bit of a long shot. Finally, he did add that there was a small feud with some other players from a previous tournament, but this was mostly just a little bit of name-calling and wasn't connected at all to the threats or the gun pictures. Either way, both remained in custody until finally, in July of 2016, despite claiming that they were not guilty this entire time, both suddenly changed their pleas to guilty. While they were originally each facing 5 weapons charges, this was reduced to 4, 2 charges each. The prosecutors were willing to dismiss the 5th charge, unlawful possession of a high-capacity feeding device, because the guns were unloaded and the ammunition was kept separate when the car was searched. As a part of a plea agreement, James pled guilty to possession of his own gun, the rifle, and Kevin pled guilty of possession of the shotgun, the gun he owned. Both pled guilty to the ammunition possession charge, however. Both of them were sentenced to 2 years in prison. They were to be given 2 years of probation afterwards as well, ordered to undergo mental health evaluations, and were ordered to possess no weapons from then on out. When looking them up on social media, it appears that at least one of them has posted in the years since this sentencing, meaning that they're probably out of jail now. We still aren't entirely sure whether or not they were really planning violence at the tournament for certain. At the very least, we can agree that their online postings were in very horrible judgment and that actually bringing the guns to the tournament was incredibly stupid. So what do you think? Do you think that they had really intended to do it, or that they simply made a lot of very, very, very bad errors? Let me know, I'm interested to hear your opinion. Personally, I believe that they had planned to do something but chickened out at the very last moment. But I base that on virtually nothing other than seeing that they entered the event without the guns weren't loaded, and that's it. But I'm very interested to hear what you have to think. Unfortunately for them, they are banned from Pokémon for life. Their dreams to be Pokemon Masters are crushed. Physically, they are free, but they are no longer free to pursue their dreams. So, thank you for watching this video, especially all the way up until the end. You're a good sport. If you like the video, please give it a like, it helps me out in the algorithm, and if you like weird crimes like this, feel free to subscribe. If you want, go ahead and add me on social media, cause you know how YouTube is. If anything were ever happen to the channel, that would probably be the only way I could get word out about it. If you want to support the channel even further, I do have a Patreon account, which I keep linked down in the description below, and speaking of which, shout out to the top patrons. We have Entreprenant, Grack, L. Palmieri, Salad, Kevin, AMCMT, Rick of Work in Progress USA, Tang, Sash Johnson, Marianne McCurdy, Buttery Frankus, Wafrans, Jules Latona, Arctic Cat, Alan Damiandri, Adrian Lawley, Marsh, Buffazerk, Rinsenstein, Kim Peak, Lux Alpaca, Charity, Scoochie Main, Jackie, and Mark Barnett. You all are the reason I woke up 1 hour earlier than I previously intended. Thank you. This has been your host, Kyle. Thank you, and good night.